Hey everybody, it's Romania Black, and we are on part 5 of our dive into Heaven Official's Blessing. As you can see, there's not much left in Heaven Official's Blessing Volume 1. I'm really excited because that means we're very close to uncharted waters. We really only have this week and next week left to go over Volume 1. I'm going to be going through Part 9 of the English translation, which covers the web serialization of chapters 24 through 28. It's pages 279 verses to 328 in the English translation. In the web version, it starts on page 197. So yeah, we've got that part today. I only picked Part 9 because it was covering like 5 chapters and like 60 pages. And I'm like, that's enough. But then next week, we'll be finishing up Volume 1 and looking at the remaining chapters of this volume, which is chapters 29 and 31, which are pretty big chapters. So I wanted to cover them both together. So we're really close to finishing this volume. I already have volumes 2 and 3. I've got volumes 4 and 5 on pre-order that I'll get by the end of this year. And then volume 6, I looked it up today. I was like, I wonder if any of the other volumes are out. Volume 6 isn't slated to come out until April of next year, which is a long time, but I have the web version. So I do like having the physical copy in hand because I can look at the pictures that are for the chapters and I can go back and kind of, as I'm taking notes, I can reread sections of it. I edit that out so you all don't see that, but I'll go back and reread sections in this version and see how it's different, which is fun. But yeah, so I'm really excited to get into part 9 today, into part 5 of our journey through the novel. I was a little sad that I was going to start volume 2 before season 2 of the Donghua came out, but somebody in the YouTube comments made a really good point. They were like, it'll be different than the Modao Zushi experience you had. And I was like, yeah, that's really true. Because with Modao Zushi, I watched 2 seasons of the Donghua. While I was waiting on season 3, I started the novel, put the novel on hold to watch all of season 3 of the Donghua, and then finished up the novel and watched the Untamed at the same time. And it was a really cool experience, but I like that this will be something different. I'll be completely going in blind into the novel, get to see it in all of its glory first off, and then we can go back and rewatch the Donghua and the live action, and we can sit there and fangirl and have a great time. I'm really excited for that. But yeah, I have a couple comments before we start this part here that I want to talk about before we dive into part 5 of our journey through Heaven Official's Blessing. Mara VL commented about how the gods broadcasted the battle back when we were having our exposition part in part 3, talking about how Hua Chong kind of beat the gods. That the gods have broadcast the battle, but it backfired in Hua Chong's favor. And Hua Chong didn't even have to do anything. So that's kind of the thing. They're all afraid of Hua Chong, but in reality, a lot of the problems that were caused for the gods, Hua Chong didn't really do anything about. Now, granted, he burned down all the temples. That's his own thing. But the whole thing with the gods broadcasting into the minds of the nobles, Hua Chong didn't really have to do anything for that. So I thought that was pretty cool to note. Kian Fong noted how ghosts don't really sleep. So all these times we've had Sanlong and Xie Lian kind of sleeping next to one another, Sanlong hasn't really slept. He's just kind of sat there and watched Xie Lian sleep. Still a better love story than Twilight. So I'm totally all about it. It's fine, but I thought that was interesting to know. I was like, how about that? Anime Annie commented how Shang is the same age as Xie Lian when he first ascended. And we were talking in the comments about how that's a really cool parallel because you have Shang, who's this very impressionable, idealistic, and kind of naive kid who's 17, the same age as Xie Lian, and that kind of innocent naivete kind of maybe reflects upon how Xie Lian was back in the day. You know, I like in the Discord on Patreon, we've been talking about how Xie Lian is like a boomer. He's like, doesn't understand what words mean. And I was like, he would be someone like I myself, I'm like a millennial. And so I'd be like, I didn't know what SMH meant for the longest time. I thought it meant like so much hate. And then finally somebody was like, it's shake my head. And I was like, oh! So I feel very much like Xie Lian trying to understand the youth every now and then. But that's really funny. And then I did like Anime Annie pointed this out saying that the woman in black that's with the Windmaster may, and we'll get to them later on. We got introduced into them to the last part. But that at the very end of the last section we looked at, the woman in black, she was talking about how she kept saying, well, why don't you get your friends to help? And I was questioning whether she was a god or a ghost. And Anime Annie said, this isn't really a spoiler, but, you know, if you think about it, not all the gods are friends. And Xie Lian, for example, doesn't have a lot of friends in the heavenly realm. So when the woman in black says, you know, your friends, she might be a god referring to the gods that are friends with the Windmaster, but not with the woman in black. So I was like, oh, okay. So it could be she'd be like, why don't you get your clique to help you? And then the Windmaster's like, no, I'd rather you help me. And it's like, So I thought that was really good to bring up. I'm glad you brought that up because it's a good perspective to kind of get at not all the gods are buddy-buddy. Some of them have cliques. Some of them like kind of associate with each other, but not others. That's pretty good to know. And then I have comments from Sarah Linda and SQQLBH, and I wanted to kind of touch base on your guys' comments last because there is like a contradiction there, and it's going to be interesting to bring up. But Sarah Linda noted how San Long was mad at Fu Yao in the desert. I said it was probably because San Long thought that Fu Yao was being kind of pretentious and being like, oh, well, this sandstorm's bad, so whoever caused it must be evil, and San Long was kind of chiding him about that. But Sarah Linda noted that he could be mad at Fu Yao because he's just being contrary. And he's like, you're being contrary and a brat, and you need to stop. And I was like, oh, that's a good perspective to bring about. And then SQQLBH noted how when Xie Lian is giving the stern talking to Fu Yao and Nanfeng, he's talking about how he needs to pick up tiles to fix the roof. And then when he goes back inside the house into the shrine, he sees that San Long is picking up tiles for the roof. And so they were on the same wavelength. It's really cute. I liked that. That was really nice. But then Sarah Linda and SQQLBH kind of had contradicting comments here. And I want to talk about that before we start because I think we're going to get answers in either this part or the next part. So it's worth noting. But Sarah Linda talked about how Zhao, in her words, was withholding information on the snake venom because he didn't want Xie Lian to investigate. Which could be, but that also kind of conflicts with him sending the snakes to attack them because SQQLBH threw in 4 notes that Zhao could control the snakes, and so they said that Zhao sent the snakes to bite somebody because it would lead them to go into the city and try to find the fern, and then they'd have to go. But there's a lot of like jumps in logic with both of those comments that I was like, yeah, but so if Zhao had the snakes bite them, knowing there's a lot of things that I'm like, it makes me question Pei Jr. a little bit in his logic with the snakes, because if he did send the snakes to attack them, I'm like, one, he knows Xie Lian has been ascended. I guess he's assuming since he has the curse shackle that he's not going to be strong and the snake could kill him. But I'm like, you grew up with Xie Lian and you want to kill him? Okay. I guess that kind of conflicts with how we see Pei Jr.'s character towards BanYue a little bit, maybe. Then 2, he knows Nanfeng and Fu Yao are gods. Did he want to kill the gods? Do you think that would be a thing? Or did he think the gods wouldn't help the people there, that they just let them die? That's kind of morbid. And it's like, if he thought that getting bit by the snake would send them in to get the fern, it's like, okay, well, that makes sense. I thought that Zhao wanted them to go into the city to try to save BanYue. He's like, well, they're here. Might as well get them to help. And maybe if he's the one that sent the puppet to go lure them there, might as well, right? So might as well get them to come in the city and help me since they've shown up and they're gods. Might as well put them to use. Otherwise, they're going to investigate and they might take her back anyway. So I feel like Zhao knew Xie Lian was not going to let BanYue go back to the heavenly realm because he had that connection with her. So I always assumed that that's why Zhao wanted them to go there. To me, it doesn't make sense that Zhao was luring them into BanYue for Kamo to fight them because, one, he knows they're gods and they can probably beat Kamo. So I'm like, that seems kind of like a weak plot point if that's true. And then I'm like, well, Hua Chong's there and he ends up killing all of them. So I don't know. It's a very odd situation. And I'm hoping that these chapters kind of clear up a little bit of that, because there was like, those comments were kind of conflicting with one another. Like one was saying, oh, he didn't want them to know about the antidote. And then the other was like, he did want them to know about the antidote. And I'm like, So it's interesting, right? And I don't, I'm assuming we're going to find out in this volume and get some more insight into what the actual answer is. But I do like that we're having like these comments in the discussion of being like, well, it could be this, but it could be that too. So I thought that was really cool. Like, neither of you, I feel, are wrong. I'm just really excited to see like, what do we find out, right? So those are my notes. That's my notes on getting ready for part 5. I'm pretty excited. We have chapters 24 through 28. We're getting into the heart of BanYue. I'm pretty excited to see where it goes. And then afterwards, I'm going to read the Manhua and see what chapters we get through there, and I'll have some images to show with you all. So I've got my coffee poured. I'm all set. It's like a vampire on it because, yes, because Hua Chong. I feel like I want to wear red to celebrate Hua Chong anytime. My spiritual connection with him knows no bounds. So let's dive in, shall we? We are going to start part 5 of our journey through Heaven Official's Blessing, and we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's read. So chapter 24, Dalling Xie Lian, Nightfall in Sinner's Pit. I'm so excited. I'm so excited. Oh, I like that it says, I'm a human too, so I won't hurt you. And Xie Lian's like, oh, you are mistaken. You look nothing like a human. Like, Xie Lian's like, nope, you are not self-aware, my friend. What a long tongue. Ugh. Oh no, the tongue that flew out was freakish. And it barged into his ear. Nope. Oh, and Xie Lian felt the body in his hold convulse violently. Oh, that's not good. No. Nope. Ugh. It drug out a large chunk of something bloody from his ear. Oh, gross. It ate part of his brain. Oh, no. It had already been molded into its soul and become something other than human. Xie Lian loosened his hold on the deceased merchant, his entire arm shaking. He was about to attack the repulsive monster when the mud face screamed again. Oh, Xie Lian's pissed. Okay. This man was gigantic. Ooh, we're getting Kamo. I like that we're getting talk about how they speak in the language of BanYue. And it's very, they say it's gluttural, ghastly, and heavy and tongue rolling. And so Xie Lian had pretty much forgotten the language. He did review it with Sanlong earlier in the general's tombs, and the words uttered by the soldiers were loud, simple, and vulgar, so they weren't difficult to understand. It's like, yep, nope. So he understands what they're saying. Yep. Okay. And so that's how he could tell everybody not to panic, because he's like, we'll figure this out as we go. They're not going to kill us. Cool. Keeping a cool head, Xie Lian. I like it. Okay, and Xie Lian is commenting how he feels like it would be hard enough for him to take one of these giant soldiers out, much less 10 of them. And he's afraid with all the people there that he can't do anything bold or he's going to put them in danger. So I like that we're getting Xie Lian breaking down why he's not immediately attacking back, because I could see somebody watching the Donghua be like, well, he's so strong, why doesn't he fight them? And so here the novel is explaining itself. We're seeing why Xie Lian is like, nope, can't do this. And then Sanlong isn't saying anything because he's like, I'm not going to reveal myself until I get these guys alone and away from you. Oh, so Kamo, when the face in the mud asks him to let him out and he slams the mace down. Oh, it says it like the teeth of the mace pierced his brains. And when he pulled the mace up, he pulled the body out of the ground with it, like plucking out a carrot, right? Oh, fulfilling his wish of let me out. Oh, and the body was not a full human body, but a chilling skeleton. The mud face, bloody after having crumpled off the mace, froze in fear at seeing his own body. Oh. And oh God, it's just screaming, this is not my body. Oh my God. Xie Lian only thought him tragic and terrifying. He shook his head and turned away. Yeah, at this point, there's nothing they can do. Oh. But Sanlong laughed mockingly. Is it only now that you're not used to your body? What was that thing that came out of your mouth earlier? Don't you think that odd? My tongue's a bit longer than average. Yeah, sure, just that much longer. Maybe. His voice full of ridicule. Ooh. And he's trying to just prove that he's human, but it's like he's long been since then not human. Like basically a ghost, right? Essentially. Sanlong laughed again. Watching him, Xie Lian could feel the chills hearing him laugh. Xie Lian thought that sometimes when this boy smiles, there's a certain cruelty hidden beneath the skin, a coldness that could rip off flesh. Ooh. Do you think you're still human? Sanlong asked. And that's when the Mudface says, of course he is. Oh. Oh, ew. Oh. He like tried to like crawl away with the skeleton, like his mashed up body. Ugh. And the BanYue general crushed him to pieces. Oh my gosh. MXTX, what? Just right off the bat, let's have this scene. Oh, man. So I want to make note real quick about San Long in the face. Xie Lian's like, oh god, so Kamo's a Hulk. Great. Great. I think it's interesting that he started off that Kamo was bullied and he was weak, and so he built his strength with training. Oh, so Xie Lian, he'd lived in BanYue's area, but he'd never really entered town and he'd never gotten near the Sinner's Pit. Interesting. Oh, and we get the idea that, okay, so in the Donghua, when he puts his hand up against the wall to kind of feel of it, he finds out that there's an array around the Sinner's Pit. So there is a ray at, he was feeling the make of the wall, yeah. It was much stronger stone enforced with a layer of magic. So that whole thing in the novel here explains in the Donghua why he was feeling the wall. Okay. Ooh, and the smell of blood wafting in the air coming from below. It's like, you know, there's something dead at the bottom and nasty. Ew. The corpse of a small, black-clad girl, tattered and head bowed. Oh, interesting. So usually the prison guards would strip the criminals of their clothing and hang the body naked. The criminals would die from starvation or dehydration, and after death, the corpse would be left to flail in the wind and burn under the sun and rot in the rain. When the corpse had completely rotten through, it would fall into the pit itself, an exceedingly ugly sight. The corpse of the girl didn't seem to be rotten, so it mustn't have been long since she died. Perhaps it was a local girl that the soldiers captured. To do such a vulgar thing to a young girl, Xie Lian felt thoroughly disgusted. Zhao, Shang, and the others' faces turned white seeing the sight and paused in their steps, afraid to go forward. Kamo didn't bother pushing them onwards, but turned towards the pit and howled. Why is he howling? Xie Lian wondered. But then there was the question was answered. There was a chorus of growls in response. The roars of beasts, bellows of tsunamis, wails of monsters, hundreds and thousands of cries exploding in the ear. The walls trembled with the noise. Ooh, I wish we'd had that in the Donghua. I don't think we did. But, so he's like, only the souls of the dead were thrown in, so what were these sounds from? He says, it's my brothers. Lian understood. He'd said, just throw 2 in and detain the rest. Okay. Oh, Xie Lian and his self-sacrificing nature that he needs to stop. He says that because he told them all in the Donghua, he's like, oh, I'll fall first. Don't worry. And it's like, oh, he's like, I'll go. And you're like, well, yeah, he's going to go in the pit and investigate. That all makes sense. But when they describe it here in the novel, he's like, if they all must fall, then he might as well be the first one to check things out. It couldn't be worse than venomous snakes and beasts or menacing ghosts. He couldn't die from falling. He couldn't die from poison. He couldn't die from bites. And he couldn't die from getting hit. As long as it wasn't some pool of corpse-dissolving water, his body shouldn't be damaged too horribly. Xie Lian! Besides, he had Ruyu with him. And even if he might not be able to escape from the array, he could still use it to catch others that fall after him. Well, at least there's that. At least he's like, I could help save people. But that whole self-sacrificing bit, I'm like, Xie Lian, we're going to have words with you. We're going to have an intervention, San Long and I. Oh, see, this all makes sense because San Long acts like nothing is wrong with the Sinner's Pit because he's Hua Chong. None of this is a problem for him. But Zhao charging to Kamo, it says that Kamo was the bigger man, strong like a steel tower, but even he got pushed back 3 steps from Zhao's desperation. Well, that and the fact that Zhao is the puppet of a god makes sense. Why he could be that strong. And he instantly threw the young man at the dark void. Oh, and so they all think from the noises that are being made that he's not going to survive. Xie Lian did not expect this development and was dumbstruck. He had been suspicious that Zhao was a subordinate of the BanYue Goshi, leading travelers astray to the ruins. He was suspicious he was the one who was here 50 to 60 years ago. Okay, so we're getting this. But he was the first to get killed. With this jump, how could he still live? How could he still live indeed? Was he faking his death? If Zhao was the Goshi's subordinate, he'd have the upper hand and could very well reveal his true identity and glory without doing something extra like this. Why would Zhao rush towards Kamo and die a meaningless death? Xie Lian's thoughts were in knots again. Oh, I love that. I love that kind of reference. It kind of refers to Ryuyi. Oh, and Shang doesn't want to get taken. So I like that he speaks in BanYue's native language, and Kamo kind of questions him, and he says he's from the Midlands. He says he wouldn't mind if he had lied to say he was a citizen, but his language was so rusty, he's like he couldn't have kept up the lie if he conversed too much. So he's like my BanYue's a little sketchy, so I don't want to speak too long in it. And he's like, it was obvious from his looks that he was a Midlander. Okay. And Kamo was just asking the question because he was confused. The people of BanYue detested liars more than anything. That's why he doesn't want to lie. And he says the kingdom of Yong'an is long since fallen. There's no more Yong'an now. When Kamo asks if he's a descendant of that, he says, but to the people of BanYue, everybody from the Midlands are all the same. Okay. I like the Xie Lian. He's like, who are you? How do you know our native tongue? It's been 200 years since we fell. And Xie Lian, I like that he steals a look at Shang, being like, mentally hoping that if his lies fell apart later, he could shamelessly ask San Long to help him. So he was fully intending on relying on San Long to help. Good to know. He cleared his throat and was ready to start gabbering nonsense when just then a series of enraged growls sounded from below. And they were still hungry for more. So I'm guessing Zhao got away though. And yes, this is kind of brought up in the Donghua. But I like they say for the dead, but they were the dead whose time had stopped. Hatred and grudges would not fade with the changing of times. Yeah, so that's interesting to note that for the ghosts, time stops. And a lot of them still hold the same grudges, regardless of how history for the rest of the world has changed. That kind of relates back to Shanji and her grudge against Pei Ming. Interesting. I like that Xie Lian's very worried that San Long has offered himself as tribute, and he's just looking at the pit as if he's ready to jump, and Xie Lian's like, this isn't a good sign. He's like, San Long. Hearing his call, San Long looked over and smiled softly. It's fine. Oh, and he teetered dangerously to the edge. Xie Lian's head and heart started pounding. He said, wait, San Long, don't move. Oh, and San Long glanced at him again with a smile. Don't be scared. He's like, you come back here first. Come back here and I won't be scared. And he's like, don't worry. I'm just going to leave for a bit. We'll see each other again soon. He's like, don't. And then with his arms still crossed in a light leap, he disappeared into the abyss. The moment he jumped, Ryuyi shot out from Xie Lian's wrist, a stream of white flash trying to grab hold of the boy's form, yet the drop was too swift and Ryuyi returned without even a sleeve corner. Xie Lian fell to his knees and screamed and yelled San Long. So the question is, did Ryuyi leap out towards San Long on his own accord, or did Xie Lian order him to do it, like in the moment? And then he leapt. Oh, that's so creepy. So Xie Lian was about to jump in, and then Kamo got involved, and then Ryuyi was trying to like wrap himself around Kamo, and then Kamo was like making his muscles bulge like to Hulk out and like rip Ryuyi. And it says that the corpse, when Xie Lian was at a standstill with Kamo when he saw something peculiar out of the corner of his eye. The corpse that hung on the pole suddenly jerked, raising her head slightly. Creepy! Creepy! Nope. The black-clad girl somehow untied herself and hopped off the pole and sped towards them. She was like a black wind blowing through the eaves, fast and wicked. Ooh, and they all fell into the sinner's pit one by one. He did understand the words, it's that bitch again. Oh my god. Oh. And they both fell into the inescapable sinner's pit. Oh my gosh. Here we go! Here we go! Here he comes. Oh, I'm so ready. I'm so ready. Oh my gosh. Xie Lian, he was like, he thought he was going to crater and flatten like a pancake like he had many times before, when suddenly in the darkness there was a flash of silver. Like many times before. Xie Lian's like, I'm just going to be flattened into a boneless pancake. It's happened every Wednesday in the last 200 years. Like, what? No. Oh, and a pair of hands lightly caught him. Ooh. Whoever it was had caught him perfectly, as if this person was just made to catch him at the bottom. Shut up! Shut up! Oh my god. So he did call, Xie Lian did call out San Long, and San Long didn't answer, so he patted his chest and squeezed his chest and shoulders, being like, San Long, is that you? No answer! So he's like, maybe it was because here at the bottom of the pit, the stench of blood was heavy and disorienting. But Xie Lian dazedly continued to feel up the person he was holding until he reached a strong, hard Adam's apple. He came to in shock and immediately reprimanded himself, pulling his hands back. What was he doing? What are you doing, Xie Lian? Why are you grabbing at his neck? What are you doing? He's like, it's San Long, right? Are you all right? Are you hurt? It took a moment before he heard the boy's low voice from somewhere very close to him. I'm fine. For some reason, Xie Lian felt that the voice was curiously different from before. Chapter 25! Oh my god! Okay! And then Xie Lian, he's like, put me down. And San Long's like, no. He's like, what's going on? Was there something on the ground? Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Oh no! Xie Lian was going to raise his hands and gently push himself away, but just as he laid his hand on San Long's chest, he abruptly remembered how he had just been randomly touching him all over, even feeling up his Adam's apple, and quietly withdrew his hand again. It had been hundreds of years since the last time Xie Lian cared about what was awkward, but now there was a voice in his head telling him he'd better stay still and stay decent. Xie Lian, you old maid. Oh my god. Oh my gosh. So we're talking about, we're at the dance scene where San Long is still like holding Xie Lian bridal style and dancing around Kamo, avoiding him. And it's quiet. There are no more sounds of anything screaming because San Long's killed all of them. And so in the dark, Xie Lian heard a series of broken, clanking sounds, clear and intense, swishing here and there. Kamo rushed to capture them, but missed the first time, and turned around to attack again. San Long also easily sidestepped again and avoided him. Xie Lian's arms involuntarily climbed up San Long's chest once more, and held on tight to his shoulders, unconsciously clutching at his clothes. It's so freaking romantic. Like, you couldn't write this better in MXTX, could you? Ooh, I love this line from Xie Lian, because he uses Ryuyi to like attack Kamo, and Kamo is like, to you two against one, unfair. And Xie Lian thinks, you were gonna kill us. Who cares if it's 2 against 1, or if it's fair or unfair? Saving my life is more important. I'll kill you dead first. Ooh, saucy! Our cinnamon bun has got his spice back. Oh my gosh. San Long, on the other hand, only sneered. Even one-on-one, you won't win. You don't have to fight. The last line was directed at Xie Lian, and the words had none of the gibe, mocking tone. All right, Xie Lian responded, but also prompted him, San Long, why don't you put me down? I'll be in your way like this. He's like, you're not in the way. Don't come down. It's like, why can't I come down? This guy couldn't possibly enjoy fighting while carrying someone, and he said 2 words, it's dirty. Xie Lian had never imagined that to be the answer. He thought it was kind of funny, but it made him feel kind of strange. This feeling was hard to describe, but his heart was unmistakably warmed. They're like Morticia and Gomez Addams. They are. It's like Morticia and Gomez Addams, where there's like all this death and destruction around them, and they're like, you're so cute. You're cute too. It's like, you two, stop. There's like, Xie Lian's like, wow, this is kind of ominous what you just told me, but it was also really precious, so. You two are the weirdest, and I love you, both. So, Xie Lian's like, you could put me down. He's like, I could, but I'm going to keep holding you. And he's like, Xie Lian didn't know what to say because he's being completely sincere. And so Xie Lian's like, he tells San Long not to kill Kamo, that they need to question him. And he's like, I wasn't planning on killing him anyway. Otherwise, he wouldn't have lasted until now. It's like, nope. And then suddenly dead silence returned to the Sinner's Pit. And after a moment, Xie Lian asked, San Long, did you do all of this down here? Even if nothing was visible in the dark, with such an overpowering stench of blood, such an aura of bloodlust, plus the enraged madness of Kamo, it was obvious what had happened. There was another momentary silence before Xie Lian heard San Long's response. Yes, he said. It was an expected answer. Xie Lian sighed. How should I say this? Ooh. He chewed his words and organized his thoughts. San Long, next time you see a pit like this, just don't jump in randomly. I couldn't even stop you. Really, I don't know what to do. Yeah, you think he's going to expose San Long and be like, you're Hua Chong, aren't you? But instead he's like, don't jump down like this. You could hurt yourself. You boomer. And then San Long didn't seem to expect this kind of response and let out a confused eh. When he spoke again, he sounded a bit odd. Don't you want to ask anything else? He's like, what else do you want me to ask? For example, whether I'm human. And Xie Lian rubbed his forehead. He does that a lot. He rubs his forehead when he's like, ah. He's like, I don't think that's necessary. Is it not? Is it? It's not important whether you're human or not. Oh? Okay, and this is where he tells him, relationships should depend on chance and whether we're on the same wavelength, not on identity. If I like you, you can be a beggar and I'll still like you. If I dislike you, you can be an emperor and I'll still dislike you. Shouldn't it be like that? It's simple logic. So whether you're human or not is irrelevant. And San Long laughed out loud. Yeah, you're very right. Right? He said laughing too. But yeah, he was still being carried by him. Oh my gosh, what kind of situation was this? Probably one of my favorite parts of the whole season was this conversation that they have. It's probably one of my favorite parts because it establishes the basis of their relationship, that they are, neither of them are judgmental of each other. They both accept each other for who they are and they love each other despite who they are. So it's like, I love it so much. Okay, so San Long knows about the array. He knows about it too and tries to tell Xie Lian, and Xie Lian's like, yeah, I know. I figured it out as well. And then so Xie Lian trips and San Long says, be careful, I told you the ground was dirty. Xie Lian now understood what dirty meant. He's like, I want to ignite a palm torch and see what's happened down here and go from there. San Long didn't say anything. Okay. Yep. He's like, wah. Oh my God. Okay. I've been comparing San Long to Wuxin, like San Long being a combination of Wuxin and Lan Wangji from Modao Zushi. But in this moment, Xie Lian is very much like Wei Wuxin when he's like, because they asked if Kamo was a loyal supporter of the BanYue Gyoshi, and he starts like yelling at her, calling her a bitch and screaming and cursing. And it says that he uttered a string of curses, inflamed and hysterical, his words rapid and incomprehensible. And Xie Lian blanked, unable to follow. He looked to San Long and quietly called, San Long, San Long. It sounds like him saying, Lanzan, Lanzan. Like, oh, that's all I can think of. It's like he's being like, Lanzan, Lanzan, help me, help me. And San Long translated, he's cursing. Okay, yeah. That woman betrayed his country and opened the gates and let the young and army slaughter. She's got the blood of her people on her hands. And of his brothers whom she pushed into the pit, he'll hang her dead 1,000 times, 10,000 times. Wait, hold on, Xie Lian quickly exclaimed. How could this be? There were two things that didn't match. And this is where he figures out that things aren't what they seem. And so we go to chapter 26. Okay, all right. The story was getting more complex and convoluted. I feel like that is Heaven Official's blessing in a nutshell, that the story is getting more complex and convoluted. We've got 8 volumes of this, right? In the English translation. I like that Xie Lian, they're trying to argue with Kamo to get him to tell them more, and Kamo's not buying it. He's like, you guys are suspicious. You threw yourselves into the pit. And Kamo is not listening to reason. He says, the two of you are sly and unjust, fighting me 2-on-1. Xie Lian felt a little exasperated. I only smacked you once. I didn't do much. I love it. I love it. He didn't mind being called sly or unjust. If the situation called for it, never mind 2-on-1, he would bring 100 men to beat down, who cared about one-on-one. But earlier, San Long obviously had the upper hand even while carrying him, and told Xie Lian not to fight too. Xie Lian felt bad for him. So Xie Lian has infinite patience. He's like, we don't have a problem. We're stuck in here. We're fine. We've got time to like slowly whittle Kamo down and make him talk. But San Long, on the other hand, did not have the same patience. He's like, you better answer these questions now for the sake of your soldiers. And then that's when he threatens the corpses. Oh, and the people of BanYue took deaths and funerals extremely seriously. They believed that however the deceased looked at the time of their death, that's how they would be reborn. Oh. Yeah, I'd say San Long just kind of threw a big old wrench into that. And then we're now going to get into the whole thing about BanYue being half BanYue and half Yongin. Interesting. So we talk about how we went through going through a backstory, but there was a riot that broke out like after 4 years after her mama died, and the two armies fought and the battle took many lives, and afterwards the mixed blood girl disappeared. Nobody noticed until she reappeared. So interesting. So they talk about how when she was in the desert, which we know she was with Xie Lian for a while, that they don't know what kind of encounter she had, but when she returned, she had learned black magic and could control the snakes. And so many were impressed, but also afraid when she returned because her personality didn't change. She was still gloomy and unsociable. And so there were many that feared that they had bullied her in the past. And if she were to enter the palace and get like a place of status, she would seek revenge on them. And Xie Lian says, I'm sure there were many who spoke poorly of her. And Kamo humphed. Not just slander, they went to the palace directly to advise the king, saying she was an evil messenger from the Scorpion Snake clan, here to bring ruin to the kingdom of BanYue, but none of them succeeded. I like that Xie Lian's like, well, those bullies, did she hang them first? And Kamo's like, young man of Yongin, why is your mind so full of depraved and vile developments? It was none of that. I protected her. And then Xie Lian was exasperated. I already said I'm not from Yongin. All right, whatever. like Kamo's like getting really into the story and trying to tell him, and Xie Lian's like, whatever, just go on with it. I like this, that she did the right thing. She like organized all the bodies that they lost in the desert and was honorable to them, because that was, you know, they established earlier that BanYue was all about like very strict formal funerals. And so she doing that, I love that they described that her body was covered in blood and that she was still guarding the entrance hole silently, hugging her knees and waiting for them like a small little lone wolf. And that's when she earned Kamo's respect, and he decided that he would protect her and fight back against all those malicious voices who went against her. So he decided to fight off her bullies. Nice. Okay. And it said that he grew up being bullied, so he understood her strife and paid more attention to her. Right, God. So yeah, connecting those two characters together, that he had been bullied. Okay, so he understood. Okay. That all makes much more sense now. So yeah, he talks about how she had done she said she conducted a grand ceremony to pray to the heavens, saying it was to bring blessings to the BanYue soldiers. So I like that we're tying the heavenly realm to this big battle, right? And all this bloodshed. And the soldiers' will to kill exploded, and their battle spirits raised, and they defended the gates to the death. There were arrows and giant boulders and boiling oil, swords and blades, and the slaughtering was incessantly great, and that's when she opened up the fortress gates. And millions of enemy soldiers swarmed into the city like mad. And we established that we basically had millions of the Yongin warriors versus like 4,000 soldiers. So yeah, millions versus 4,000. No way. It became a ritual of blood. Kamo, who was fighting hard against the enemies, went mad with rage when he heard the Goshi had opened the gates. But no matter how tough he was, one could not win alone against so many. So yeah, one against many is going to be a loss. And so I only learned then that she had long since colluded with the enemy general and agreed to let them in. So he knew that she was betraying them, that she was colluding. Okay, so Kamo knew. And so BanYue and the general died in battle and became trapped within the ruins, watching the other in mutual grudge and hate. Okay. All right, so Kamo and BanYue were trapped together as ghosts. Oh, so Xie Lian's trying to figure out, like, so they basically established that he would get the people and throw them down to the soldiers that she trapped in the pit. And he's like, we have to feed them something or they're just going to keep screaming. And so Xie Lian's like, did you catch them yourselves? Her snakes like to hunt and often crawl the ruins to bite people. And they'd come to the city looking for the fern. We're getting it all explained slowly but surely. So this is interesting. So they're going through how all this was set up, and I'm like, am I gonna have to bring White Raccoon out for this? But basically, he's like, well, did you throw the people down yourselves? He's like, no. He's like, we can't go that far outside of BanYue, but the snakes bite people, and then they come to the city looking for the fern. And so he's like, well, you buried that man in the mud, right? And he's like, well, yeah, that man that was buried in the earth was trying to rob the city riches of the palace, but the treasures from our kingdom were cleared out years ago by the Yongin men, 200 years ago. And he's like, well, why'd you only bury him instead of throwing him directly down? He's like, well, there's got to be fertilizer to grow the ferns. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to hold these scorpion snakes back. We don't want to run into the creatures either. And Xie Lian says, that's not right. So Xie Lian's like figuring out how, like, this is not, things are not adding up. So I like the Xie Lian's working this out. Xie Lian's like, why would she let herself keep being caught and hung repeatedly over and over again if she can control the snakes? Why was she caught in the first place if she could control the snakes? Because clearly the soldiers all fear them. Yeah, and in all this mess, he's saying, does Kamo and BanYue have like mutual hatred towards one another? That doesn't make sense. Are they pretending to be enemies? What's going on? And then in all this mess, there was the mysterious lady in white and her companion. Xie Lian decided to ask more questions. And he's like, we saw two ladies in white and black. Do you know who they are? And so that's when San Long goes, shh. And that's when BanYue shows up. Oh my gosh. Yep. Okay. Chapter 27. Oh shit. So BanYue jumps down there and asks what's going on. And Kamo's like, they're all dead. And she's like, how'd they die? And he's like, isn't it because you pushed them down here and trapped them in this godforsaken hell? And she says, who's there? There's another person. At the bottom of the pit, there should be two other people. But San Long had neither breath nor a heartbeat, so the Goshi didn't detect his presence. Oh! And it was complete chaos. No one kept track of who fell and who ran away, so she thought the only person there was Xie Lian. But was that it, or did she also know that it was Zhao down there? I just love that confirms. It's like, no, that confirms that San Long is not alive. Nice. Okay. That's good. Ooh. Says her both eyes were blackened, not unbeautiful, but just unhappy. Her forehead and cheeks were full of bruises, clear and distinct under the light. The hand controlling the palm torch was shaking, causing the flames to flicker. Oh. And so he could see that they're the pile of armored corpses, but he couldn't help but sneak a look beside himself. But using the wee light, Xie Lian could faintly see the one next to him was dressed in red. But he seemed taller than before. He moved his eyes up and paused at the neck and then continued upwards, stopping at an elegantly shaped chin. San Long's upper features were still hidden in the shadows because of course they were. But Xie Lian thought the bottom half was distinctly different from before. Still handsome, but the lines were much more defined. Feeling like he was being watched, San Long tilted his head and curled his lips upward slightly. Perhaps he wanted too much to get a better look, to get closer, that without realizing it, Xie Lian took a step closer to him. She says, it's good, they're finally freed. She turned to Xie Lian, were you the one who killed them? And Xie Lian goes, this was an accident. And he says, you're lying through your teeth. And Xie Lian responded bold-facedly, life is full of accidents. Oh my God, Xie Lian, no. And she gave him a look where her expression was unreadable. Who are you? Oh. I'm a heavenly official. And this one here is my friend. They were really good friends. Oh my God. Oh, so Xie Lian's like, this is too easy. She's just letting us go. She like drops the array and she's like, get out of here. Which makes sense now. BanYue does not want there to be heavenly officials involved because I'm sure she thinks that something bad is going to happen if the heavenly realm gets involved. So she's like, nah. And so she's like, just get out and go. And that's when Fu Yao shows up. Oh my God, Xie Lian heard San Long beside him and immediately looked up. Yes! Xie Lian's like, Fu Yao, there's people down here. I'm down here. After Xie Lian shouted, he also waved. And Fu Yao shouted back, you're actually down there? What's at the bottom beside you? Lots of things. Why don't you come down and see for yourself? Fu Yao probably thought the same and blew a large ball of fire into the pit. In an instant, the entire center's pit was lit up bright like day. And Xie Lian finally clearly saw the kind of place he'd been standing in. All around him were mountains of bloody corpses piled high, innumerable bodies of BanYue soldiers stacked on top of each other, faces and limbs blackened, dark blood smearing the bright armor. The corner Xie Lian was standing was the only spot in the entire center's pit that did not have a dead body. This was all done in a flash, in the dark, by San Long after he jumped in. And he turned to the boy next to him again. Before, in the dark, he thought San Long looked taller and was distinctly different in certain features, but now, under the bright firelight, the one standing next to him was the same handsome youth he'd known. When he saw Xie Lian looked over, he grinned. Xie Lian looked down to check his wrists and boots, and both were the same as before, having nothing that would have caused any jingling sound. Yes! Oh my God. And Fu Yao. Oh my God. And Fu Yao just fans his hand at the sound of blood. Oh my God, what a diva. Uh-huh. Nice. Okay, so Kamo is heavily wounded and barely able to stand. Okay. Oh, a large beefy warrior attacking a little girl. In the past, Xie Lian would never have allowed this sort of thing to have happened before him. But Kamo had every reason to hate the Goshi, and she could very well defend herself, yet she didn't, letting herself be thrown around like a broken rag doll. I think it says something when Fu Yao is like, he's watching Kamo like beat the tar out of this little girl, and he's like, he doesn't understand what they're saying, and he's like, shouldn't we stop them? When Fu Yao is saying, shouldn't we stop them? That's a sign you should step in. And Xie Lian couldn't watch anymore either, and rushes forward to ask who the youngin' thug was that was the problem. But BanYue grabs his wrist, okay, being like, no, thinking she was going to ambush him. When he looked down at her, she was on the ground, a small bruise on the corner of her mouth, her head raised, watching him intently. She didn't say a single word, but her dark eyes were intense with a flaming sense of life. This demeanor overlapped with an image from a far-gone memory. And after a pause, Xie Lian blurted, "It's you." And she said, "General Hua." The back and forth stunned everyone in the pit. And Fu Yao rushed forward, knocked Kamo out with one punch, and demanded, "You two know each other?" He's like, God, Fu Yao, okay. I love that he kneels to the ground and grips her shoulders. It's like one of my favorite things that he gets on her level. So he said before they couldn't see clearly, and it had been over 200 years. This girl had matured in that time. And for many reasons, he didn't recognize her at first, but it was the same face from his memories. BanYue. He couldn't speak for the longest time, and it was a good moment before he sighed. Oh. He says her gloomy face suddenly came alive with excitement. "It's me, General Hua. Do you remember me? Do you still remember me?" He says, "Of course I remember you, but..." Xie Lian gazed at her for a long moment and sighed. "But what have you done to yourself?" Oh, and her eyes suddenly filled with pain. "I'm sorry, Captain. I messed up." Oh, it's like, why'd you become a ghost? And then Fu Yao's like, "You're the general of the tomb." And he's like, "Didn't you say you only came here to collect junk 200 years ago?" And he's like, "It's a long story. That was originally the plan, though." Around 200 years ago, due to some such reasons that we're not finding out yet, Xie Lian couldn't muck around in the East anymore. Okay, so in the East, we've not really talked about the East. We've talked about the West. We've talked about the West and the North. Not talked about the East. Interesting. Okay, so Xie Lian for reasons, can't be in the east. Because, yeah, we established that the Peis are in the north, and Juan is in Jishan is in the west, and then we have like the southeast and southwest are Fengshen and Muqing, but we haven't really talked about who's in the east. Interesting. Don't answer that question. Oh, so he was gonna go south. So I find it interesting. Okay, was going south. I find it interesting he was going south because that's where Muqing and Fengshen were, which were his subordinates. So it's funny whether or not he remembered that and was going there for a certain reason. He was going south, which maybe it could have been instinct. It could have been he at the time he's forgotten, but he had intended to go there to see them for whatever reason, or to see their kingdoms and where their temples were. But for whatever reason, he ended up going the wrong way because his compass was broken. Of course it was broken. He has bad luck. But yeah, Xie Lian has bad luck. Okay. And ended up near BanYue. Okay. Oh, he says, why did she call you General Hua? Your surname isn't Hua. And Xie Lian waved his hand dismissively and said, oh, don't worry about it. I randomly made up a fake name at the time. I think it was Hua Shi. And hearing the name, Sanlong's expression changed slightly, his lips twitching. Xie Lian didn't pay attention and continued, yeah. And then BanYue was the orphan that he played with. Interesting. So it says that when there were bandits, Xie Lian was surely the bravest soldier, and no one dared block his way, nor did anyone dare to even stand beside him. But when there weren't, it was as if anyone could order him around. Oh, he says he was standing by the campfire using his own helmet to cook. As he cooked, the smell of it drifted out, and a few enraged soldiers came to kick whatever it was he was cooking. Xie Lian picked up his helmet with a broken heart. Oh! But when he looked back, there was a small, disheveled, grimy child picking the stuff up and stuffing it in her mouth, not caring if it was too hot. And they're like, don't wait, little kid. Oh! He said, as expected. The little kid scarfed down a few lumps of the stuff she had picked off the ground and then dry heaved heavily, crying loudly. Xie Lian was so shaken that he picked her up upside down and ran laps until all the stuff she came back out. And after she was done, he crouched down and wiped away a seat for them. Oh my God. Like, I'm just picturing him, like, running around with her upside down, trying to get her to throw it up. Xie Lian, maybe you shouldn't cook. Oh, and so she goes back to eat it, and he's like, what are you doing now? The child's face was covered in tears, but she still went to pick off the ground again, still wanting to eat. It was only after Xie Lian grabbed her that he realized that the skin of this child's stomach was practically pressed to the back of her bones. She was starved to the point where she could have eaten anything. Even if it was disgusting to the point of tears, she would eat it. Oh. Because she was singled out by the children of the BanYue kingdom, other than Xie Lian, there was only a Yong'an boy living at the border who would sometimes pay attention to her, so she'd spend her days tagging along behind the two of them. And so when he was free, sometimes he'd teach them songs, sometimes wrestle, and sometimes show off his busker move, shattering boulders on one chest or something, and they got along quite well. So we've established that Xie Lian can shatter boulders on his chest. That's somehow this canon thing he can do. It doesn't seem like it's likely, but he does it, and I like that they keep bringing it up. It's kind of funny. After some silence, Sanlong spoke up. The memorial said that you died. On the subject of that memorial, Xie Lian felt quite bummed out. Weren't memorials usually praise and exaggerated good deeds to glorify the deceased? All those mentions of the demotions aside, why did it have to so solemnly record the embarrassing way that he died? While they were hiding away from the sandstorm and he read to this part, he could barely look at it straight on. If it wasn't for Sanlong, who also understood BanYue's script and was watching him, he was going to pretend that that segment never existed. Having something like that written down, even he wanted to laugh at it. Never mind other people. that he'd had the nerve to ask those seeking shelter in his memorial to not laugh as they commentated and laughed at his epitaph. It made him feel really bummed. Xie Lian's forehead was becoming red from all the rubbing. Of course I didn't die. I faked it. Fu Yao had a face full of disbelief, and Xie Lian explained himself. I got trampled on too hard and couldn't get up, so there wasn't any other way besides faking my death anyway. Truthfully, Xie Lian couldn't quite remember exactly how he died, nor why that battle broke out in the first place, only that it was over something petty. He really didn't want to fight. Victory or defeat was meaningless. But by then, his rank could go no lower, and no one would listen to him. In the midst of battle, everyone saw red, so when he rushed out, it was blades and swords coming at him from both sides, cutting him down. Oh. And Fu Yao questioned, it must be because you're an eyesore standing in the middle that you raise the ire of both sides, right? Otherwise, why would people just cut you down when they see you? Besides, I'm sure that you knew there were so many people who hated you there, so why didn't you evade all those people? Why didn't you evade all those people? Why did you charge in? I'm sure you could have dodged if you wanted to. Ooh. Chapter 28. I really don't remember, all right, Xie Lian said. Even if he couldn't die, he couldn't stand that kind of butchering. Thinking this couldn't go on in his head, Xie Lian resolutely dropped to the ground to fake his death. But even in death, he was trampled to the point of passing out. It was water choking him that woke him, because corpses were usually thrown in the rivers after battle. Xie Lian went with the river flow and floated back to the kingdom of Yong'an like a heap of junk. Afterwards, he took several years to recover from his wounds, picked up an unbroken compass to start off anew, and finally made it to his original destination in the south, and stopped minding what went down in the kingdom of BanYue. Oh my God! What? Oh no! MXTX, what are you doing? Oh my God, there's just so much. In that one paragraph at the start of chapter 28, there's so much that you can break down with that. And I'm like, MXTX, you can't just drop that in our laps and expect us to just not. Okay, she says it was to save me that you entered the battle. Like you forgot, but you entered the fray to save me and you got flattened. Xie Lian instantly remembered the agony of being trampled by thousands, and he hugged his arms in spite of himself. When we saw two others watching him with unreadable expressions, he pulled himself back in a hurry and said, not flat, not too flat. Fu Yao didn't look so smug anymore and said awkwardly, well, aren't you a saint? Like they felt that bad for him. He's like, no, nothing of the sort. I think I was just going to pick the child up and run away immediately, but we didn't retreat fast enough and got caught between the two armies. If that's the case, Fu Yao said, how can you not remember something like that? Xie Lian looked at him solemnly. Do you not know how many hundreds of years old I am? So much can happen in just a decade. There's no way to remember everything in detail. Besides, some things are best forgotten. Rather than remembering how I was butchered and trampled hundreds of years ago, I'd prefer to remember that I ate a delicious meat bun yesterday. No? And BanYue says, I'm sorry. Damn. Oh, Xie Lian, my dear BanYue, saving you is my only choice. You're not at fault. If you're going to apologize, perhaps it should be to others. Aww. So Fu Yao takes out the god-binding rope and apprehended BanYue and Kamo, and says, all right, we've accomplished our goal for this trip. It's all over now. And Songlong said she had no reason to lie. Can you not control any of your snakes? Yeah, here we go. With a sudden lunge, Xie Lian was ready and was about to grab for it when boom, something exploded. When he opened his eyes again to see, the snake was already a splatter of guts on the ground, thoroughly blown apart. It was a calculated blast too. None of the venom had spilled. Xie Lian immediately remembered another instance where the snake died like this before they entered the ruins. But there was no need to say who did it at that point. He hadn't even had the chance to look at Songlong before a red sleeve flashed before him, barring and separating him from BanYue. Yeah, so he figured out that it was Songlong that killed the snake. And then from every corner came an innumerable amount of scorpion snakes. Okay. They can't all disobey. Make them go away. And so she can't do it. Oh, so bites from 1 or 2 might not kill them, but from hundreds or thousands, it was harder to say. Even if they didn't die, it wouldn't be pretty. He was about to call Ryui when he saw that the snakes slithered a certain distance. They would stop and hesitate, forming a weird circle around him and Sanlong. It dawned on Xie Lian, and he glanced at the boy next to him. He was watching the snakes condescendingly with immense contempt. Oh, and they wouldn't approach. Oh my gosh, yes! Like submissive little servants. And of course, Fuyao's just like, kill it with fire. Yeah. Oh no, Fuyao got bitten by the snake. Oh no. Oh. A snake deluge! Red dots were coming closer. Okay, and the spell consumed immense power, so after one round of him like fireballing the snakes, his face was pale. He turned around, ignited a ring of fire, dispelling the snakes on the ground, and shouted at BanYue, "Are you saying those snakes don't obey you? If it weren't you controlling them, why won't they attack you?" Sanlong, maybe it's because of your bad luck. They didn't attack us either. Yeah, Xie Lian's like, this is not good. He didn't want to see them starting to fight. Either BanYue is lying or the one next to you is causing trouble. And Xie Lian's like, I don't think it's either of them. His tone was gentle but firm. Nice. Xie Lian couldn't tell if he was angry or laughing. Your Royal Highness, Fuyao said, don't play pretend when you know the truth. Do you still know your place? I'm sure you're already very aware of exactly what that thing is next to you. I won't believe you haven't realized it at all. Oh, that thing! Why are you calling Sanlong a thing? No! And that's the chapter! Damn it! No! Oh man. Next part's gonna be real good. Man, I'm gonna take a few more notes and then go read the manhwa, and Whiteboard-kun is probably gonna have to come back out for this. So just like in the donghua, we get the same damn cliffhanger. The same cliffhanger with the snakes falling down onto them. As soon as I clicked out of the web version, I was like, that was the same cliffhanger. I was like, how? How did we manage to get the same cliffhanger both times? I don't know. I'm slowly realizing how long the BanYue arc was. It was pretty long because I was like, man, we got through like 5 chapters and we still haven't even gotten the Zhao reveal yet. I was like, oh my gosh, this arc is long, but I like it a lot. We got through most of it in this part. And so next part, we're going to find out about Zhao, conclude everything, and then I remember someone saying that the OVA's materials are the final chapters of Volume 1. So I'm like, yes, we'll get the OVA stuff in this last part. So I'm really excited for next week. This week was great, but I'm really excited for next week and slowly realizing that it is probably going to take me a lot of time to read next week. So I'm going to have to really like set aside some time to do that reading because I'm like, oh buddy, it's going to take me a bit. So with that being said, I was like, oh my gosh, we've got quite a lot to talk about in this segment. So there's a lot. I wanted to bring out Whiteboard-kun only to talk mainly about Xie Lian and some things going on with the plot because I was like, okay, there's a lot going on. So Sanlong in this part is very interesting too because he's a bit more menacing than we've seen him in the story so far. And I like what MXTX does with him because what she could do is just make, Xie Lian seems like a cinnamon bun, but there's moments in this part, moments in other parts that we realize, no, Xie Lian's pretty spicy. He's got some bite to him. Him and Sanlong are quite a pair. They're so interesting and they have such good chemistry, right? I feel like it's such an interesting difference because you have, like in Modao Zushi, you have Lan Wangji and Wei Wuxian. And they are like polar opposites. They're very, very different characters, personality-wise. They're very different, but they have very similar moral cores, right? And there's like it's the weirdest thing. There's almost like there's a purity to Lanzan. There's a purity to Lan Wangji, very much so. And with Wuxian, he's like the mischievous gremlin, but there is kind of like he's a mischievous gremlin, but he's got the heart of gold, like one of those things. I find it interesting that MXTX with Xie Lian and San Long, it's not like that. San Long is like the polar opposite of Lan Wangji. He is menacing. He is like filthy as in like he would kill you in an instant if he wanted you. He's covered in blood. He's soaked. He is very opposite of Lanzan. But Xie Lian is kind of, he seems like on the outside with Wei Wuxian on the outside seems like a delinquent, but he's got like that innocent heart of gold on the inside. And granted, he's got some gremlin tendencies, but deep down inside, he's like this compassionate, caring person. Xie Lian seems on the outside like a cinnamon bun, but on the inside, he's got some spice and sass. And so it's kind of, I love the MXTX going into the story. I was afraid that the main pair would be very similar to Lan Wangji and Wei Wuxian. I was afraid of that. I was like, is it going to be more of the same? But no, it is so different. I'm like, they are such different characters. And I'm like, okay, cool. I'm all about it. So I really like that. So yeah, but San Long, him laughing coldly at the face in the mud and just being like, and about that, he laughs at him because the face in the mud is talking about how he's still human. And San Long's like, oh, are you? You're not. Quit lying to yourself. So it's interesting. I feel like San Long is projecting. Hua Chong is projecting there. So we're gonna put, and I always want to put San Long in red because it's his color. Right? So San Long, we're going to put him and Hua Chong right here and just talk about them right over here. So he's basically, he seems like he is projecting to the face in the mud. And I'm just going to put the face in the mud, FIM, being like, you're not human, right? You're no longer human and you need to accept it. So I feel like he's projecting to the face in the mud, and it almost seems like in the book that he's basically saying like, no, you're a monster. And in that moment, it almost seems like San Long is saying like, I'm a monster too, so I would know. Because yeah, I think San Long, his biggest thing is that he knows he's not human anymore. He's a ghost. He's accepted that, obviously, and become this like king of ghosts. But he thinks that he's a monster. And I'm like, you're hot. Shut up. Like, you're not a monster. You're, oh, boo-hoo, San Long. You're beautiful. But you don't think it, right? But again, I tease him for that as a character. But then I also think it's because of his actions. I think San Long, in some ways, thinks that he's a monster not because of how he looks necessarily, but because of his actions. Because he's killed so much. And he's talked to Xie Lian about how when Hua Chong was alive, he was not a nice person. So I think that all of that lends to his belief that he's a monster. But I'm like, Xie Lian loves you either way. Xie Lian doesn't think you're a monster. He thinks that you're a prince. So, you know, a king. So, or I think that's what he's gonna say, you know. And he kind of justifies it here with his speech. We'll get to it. But I find San Long very interesting right from the start. Like, his personality is much colder in this section. He's a lot more menacing. He shows off that he can kill like thousands of troops in a single instant. He can burn down 10,000 temples in a night. This is cakewalk, right? But yeah, so Xie Lian talks about how he's been to BanYue before, but not necessarily the sinner's pit. And he brings up this concept of going with the flow. He starts out with that concept. So we're going to put Xie Lian right here. Almost put him in blue, but I like this purple better. So he talks about the idea of going with the flow. And he'll bring that up again, and we'll talk about that when we get to the part about where he died and flowed down the river. It was like a little foreshadowing to that being coming back to it. But that whole idea of going the flow, that Xie Lian has just basically been meandering about for hundreds of years, just coming and going as he pleases. I get kind of like, it just seems like Xie Lian has kind of lost his way. He's really just lost, he has lost his sense of purpose. And instead, he's just kind of floating. Doesn't really have a sense of purpose at this point. He had already, you know, at this point, he'd already been demoted twice. Hadn't really saved anybody. We'll talk about that with the big old paragraph that MXTX drops on us like a grenade of Xie Lian's angst. But he just doesn't really have a purpose. He's like, I'm just going to go do what I can and then keep collecting scraps. Just be a meager scrap collector and live out my days of immortality on this earth doing just that. Almost like he's like repenting, right, for whatever's happened in his past. So there's that. But they get to the sinner's pit, and I like that in the Donghua, I remember he ran his hand across the side of the sinner's pit. I remember that we were talking about in the comments, like, that means something. And then we find out it was him checking out the sinner's pit. And we find out here in the book that, yes, he immediately had realized there was an array around the sinner's pit. He was checking it. Why the Donghua does not give us inner monologues with Xie Lian, I don't know. I'm like, if you had just explained that, like with an inner monologue that he was thinking, that could have, cleared up a lot of confusion, but it's fine. But yeah, I like that Xie Lian, we get his views on there. And then we see BanYue hanging from the pole. And the Manhua, I love how BanYue looks in the Manhua. She's got this like gothic design. She's got like the black robes and everything. And like, because Star Ember is such a good artist, the bruises on her look like makeup. So it's like, okay. But she looks beautiful, like even for a kid. BanYue looks really, really pretty. And Xie Lian makes the comment that she's matured a lot, even as a ghost. So that's interesting. We'll talk about that here shortly. But yeah, I do appreciate that she's not naked on the pole. And I think that ties back to the fact that Kamo, he still respected her, even in death, even despite her betrayal, even in death, he respected her enough while she was alive to not strip her naked and hang her from a pole. And I do appreciate Kamo doing that. Star Ember draws Kamo very differently than the Donghua. I think because Star Ember has to make everyone beautiful, no matter who they are in the Manhua. Everyone has to be beautiful, even Kamo. Because in the Donghua, he looks like a troll. He looks like a big giant troll, right? In the Manhua, he looks like you wouldn't really even know he was a giant. His proportions, he's just a big guy. But he looks very handsome, and it's like, man, Star Ember, even the face in the mud kind of had like a weird, like, prettiness to it. So it's like, you just can't draw no uggos in this Manhua, said Star Ember, and that's fine. But, so we get the array in the sinner's pit, and then, God, Xie Lian, just being self-sacrificing to a fault. Being like, well, it's fine. I'll just throw myself down in the pit. It's okay. I'll just throw myself down there. I'll just fall and be like a pancake. It's happened before. And I'm like, Xie Lian, you remember a lot of these bad times for someone that says you forget everything. I'm like, he clearly knows it's happened enough that he remembers it recently. I'm like, oh, Xie Lian, no. So he's self-sacrificing about going into the pit. And then Zhao, I like the idea that the novel very subtly reveals kind of that Zhao is a god early on. Because when he pushed Kamo back, the fact that this scrawny pretty boy merchant was able to push Kamo, this 9-foot tall ghost, back several paces before falling in the pit, I'm like, that seems like something a mortal shouldn't be able to do. And MXTX just spends like one line on it. Just one line. That's it. And then he goes into the pit. But it's enough that if you watch the Donghua and then read the novel, you're like, oh yeah, that's a breadcrumb that's going to point to Zhao later on. And then Zhao disappears for the rest of this section. It's so funny because in the Donghua, everybody was commenting, being like, you've really not forgot about Zhao. I'm like, no, that's an author's trick. They'll give you something with that character and then they'll disappear for like 5 episodes and you're like, where did they go? And then they'll pop back up. Not fooling me, MXTX, not this time. So yeah, I thought that was pretty fun that we have Zhao like just showing his powers off, and Xie Lian reveals in the novel that he was suspicious of him all along, being like, I figured you were the one, the face in the mud we're talking about. You seem like the one that's leading people here to die. Like the fact that Xie Lian had kind of figured it all out beforehand is really impressive, and I'm glad that we get that. But then Zhao pieces out. I really thought we were getting there in this section. I was like, we're gonna get to Zhao, it's gonna be great. Nope. We're not getting to him yet. So it's like, dang it. And so I do like that the novel confirms something that we talked about in the comments before in the Donghua, and that's the idea that time stops for ghosts. For a lot of ghosts, time stops. And they keep repeating things that happened before and early on in their deaths over and over again, which is interesting. It's interesting because it doesn't seem to really impact San Long. San Long just seems to like do whatever he wants, and he doesn't seem to be repeating a lot of things. So I don't know. So, but we have this concept that ghosts, I'm gonna put this up here, that for ghosts, time stops or is stagnant. And we've seen that with Kamo because he can't let go of that grudge with BanYue. We've seen that with Kamo. We've seen how he keeps hanging BanYue up over and over again, even though she keeps getting away and throwing more of his soldiers in the Sinner's Pit to keep them from attacking the people. Makes sense. But we also saw it with Shanji. Shanji's whole grudge against Pei Ming. It was as if time stopped and all she kept doing was going back to him and back to those moments over and over again. And it makes sense if you think about ghosts as being beings that have unfinished business. Kamo coming back because of BanYue and his men dying, that's kind of his unfinished business, is getting revenge on her. Shanji, her unfinished business was because of her love for Pei Ming. So you kind of get the idea that for them, they're stuck in this loop, right? Now San Long, he doesn't seem to be stuck in a loop, but he might be. We just don't have clarification of it. He might be stuck in this loop that he's in love with Xie Lian and he's, come back to help keep him safe. We don't know. We don't know if he's really been following Xie Lian around this whole time or not. It doesn't seem like it, because then why wouldn't he try to make contact earlier? So someone in the comments was saying something about this and I was like, no, we don't need to bring this up. This seems like spoiler territory. Don't be hitting anything. But somebody was bringing up the idea of, well, where's he been all this time if he's just now coming to find Xie Lian after 800 years? Where's he been? And part of me wants to say, that he's been around in the background. Maybe he didn't feel like he was worthy. Maybe San Long wasn't strong enough as a ghost to feel like he was worthy to protect Xie Lian, so he wasn't worthy of him like showing himself in public. Maybe he's been in that volcano fighting thousands of ghosts to emerge victorious and be king of the ghosts, so maybe that took up a big chunk of those 800 years. Maybe that took up some time. Or maybe he was imprisoned by another ghost. Maybe, I don't know. We're going to find out in this 8-volume story at some point. But yeah, so I am thinking of that in the back of my head, like, where's San Long been this whole time? I have filed that away, but my brain is also saying, Romania, you're going to find that out down the road. Don't worry about it now. So I'm not. But I am thinking about it. If you're questioning if I've thought about that, yes, I am thinking about where San Long has been, but I've come to the conclusion that we're going to find out. Those are my theories. We'll find out down the road and it'll be fine. So, but yeah. And so we have Xie Lian talking about Xie Lian trying to get Kamo. I'm like looking at my notes. Xie Lian trying to get Kamo to go down in the pit with him. And that's when BanYue leaps off of the pole and goes and attacks the soldiers. And it looks great in the Manhua. The Manhua makes it look so good. It's like, yes, please. Like, she looks just so fierce in this. I love BanYue, how she's drawn. She's drawn a lot older than she was, but it's fine. She seems older than I pictured her, but then when Kamo is like beating her up and you see and Xie Lian realizes who she is, then she suddenly looks a lot younger than she was, so it works out in the end. But I like that she started chucking the soldiers into the pit, and then Xie Lian, he falls down thinking he's going to flatten like a pancake, but no, there's a flash of silver and the little jingling of silver on the boots. And he gets caught by San Long. And the Manhua is just like chef's kiss as far as they draw his true form. He looks kind of like a vampire. He looks like, you know what he reminds me of? Have you ever watched Adventure Time? He kind of reminds me of Marceline a little bit. He has like the pointy vampire ears and his skin is kind of like a bluish pale color because he's a ghost. It makes sense. But it kind of reminds me of Marceline from that series. So I'm like picturing like a hot male Marceline, and that's Hua Chong. I feel like Marceline would be all about it. So, but yeah, him grabbing Xie Lian. And Xie Lian, oh my gosh, if Fu Yao could roll his eyes any further in the back of his head, and if he saw this, he would. Because granted, the novel does make it very clear that it is pitch black. They can't see each other. And Xie Lian's just like feeling up around him. And I like that he stops at the hard Adam's apple. I was like, MXTX could make the Adam's apple the most sensual part of the body in this chapter. But I love that he stops and then realizes what he's been doing, and he's like, wow, this is awkward, I need to stop. And it's like, and I love how the book was like, it's been a long time since he's felt anybody up. I was like, Xie Lian, what? What is happening? And so he's felt awkward for the first time in a long time. Our poor boomer Xie Lian feels awkward being like, oh God, I'm touching this guy where I shouldn't, you know? What am I doing? And I just love that San Long is just not deterred. He's just nothing. He's just happy to hold Xie Lian as he fights off Kamo by dancing around in this beautiful choreographed display. And at this point, I really loved the idea that this novel establishes, like I said earlier, that this pair's a little bit different than Wei Wuxian and Lan Wangji. Wei Wuxian and Lan Wangji are kinky. They're innocent, but they're kinky. And so, no, Xie Lian and San Long, they're into like the messed up stuff. they really are like, what I mean by that is they're having this beautiful dance together as Xie Lian's being carried bridal style by San Long, but there's like corpses everywhere and he's fighting this ghost and Xie Lian's like, I was warmed by his touch. I'm like, there's all this other stuff going on that's disturbing and dark and grisly and gory, but all Xie Lian's like, man, he's so warm. I'm like, it's the whole butterflies all over again, where the Heavenly Realm Council is talking about like how dangerous Hua Chong is and how we should be fearful of him. And Xie Lian's like, but the butterflies. It's like, oh my God. So I love that he's perfect for San Long because he is not deterred. He's not deterred by the gore and anything that is disturbing happening. Because Xie Lian's seen pretty much everything. So he's like, I'm not disturbed. Or gore doesn't bother me. Oh, there's a bunch of corpses. I've seen that too. I've been in all these wars. Nothing's deterring me. It's interesting, right? And then I just getting saucy and spicy. I love Xie Lian getting sassy in these chapters. But his speech to San Long about relationships, because San Long, he notices that he's not breathing. He's cold, not alive. And I like that he asks San Long, he's like, did you kill all of these soldiers? And San Long is honest because Xie Lian's asking him, and he's like, yes. And then Xie Lian does the whole, you shouldn't jump through a pit then, because it's very dangerous. And I love how the Manhua makes them chibi, and San Long's just holding him like, what? And he's like, don't you want to ask me other things, like who I am, all that stuff? And Xie Lian's like, no. He's like, I like you. He's like, and if I like you, it doesn't matter if you're a beggar. And if I dislike you, it doesn't matter if you're a king. It's like, that's just how I am. He's like, I don't judge people by their status. I judge them by the content of their character. And it's so sweet. And I love that San Long's like, this is why I love you. It's like, he's like, what a great answer. I'm like, So it's great. The Donghua, it's wonderful there. It's wonderful in the novel and the Manhua too. I love it. And so then San Long talks about how he threatens to like basically annihilate the corpses if Kamo doesn't. He basically blackmails Kamo and is like, I will annihilate the corpses of your men. And San Long, I'm sure knows, like Xie Lian knows, that the people of BanYue take their funerals very seriously, and the dead bodies of the people that have passed, they want them to be kept intact because that's how they'll be reborn. And San Long's basically like, well, if you don't help us, they're going to be reborn as a puddle of blood. And I'm like, So yeah, San Long, he has no qualms. He is very menacing and threatening to everyone but Xie Lian in this chapter, and how I feel he'll be the rest of the novel. He's like, Xie Lian, you're a precious angel. In the Discord, I was like, he is basically Monterey Saperstein from Parks and Rec, where she's like, I've done nothing wrong ever in my life. And that's San Long, and Xie Lian's like her dad going, of course you haven't. You know, that's how I feel like their relationship is. San Long's like, I'm an angel, and Xie Lian's like, yes, of course. And then everybody else is like, what? And we just go from there. But then we get the backstory about BanYue. And I want to note beforehand that we get established that Xie Lian is very patient. Xie Lian is patient and plays the long game, which is how I feel this romance is going to go between them. It's going to be the long game because Xie Lian seems pretty dense as far as romance goes. He's just like, seems like San Long likes me, or, you know, he seems pretty dense about it. But Xie Lian is extremely patient. He establishes, he's like, we have all the time in the world here. We can't get out of the pit anyway. There's no soldiers to fight us. And Kamo, I like how in the novel they establish that Kamo is pretty wounded. He's wounded to the point where he can't walk. In the Dongwall, it seemed like he could still move if he wanted to. They were just kind of stalling for time. But here in the novel, it's like, nah, he can't move. He's stuck there. And so Xie Lian's like, we can play the long game and just ride this out, question him. It's all good. And San Long's like, I ain't got time for that. So San Long is not a patient person, which again, he's not a patient person. So we ask the question, why has he waited 800 years to go see Xie Lian if he's not patient? You think that he'd want to find him at every opportunity he can. And so one answer could be that maybe he has tried to contact and get with Xie Lian over the course of this series, and Xie Lian's forgotten because Xie Lian made his name Hua. So you would think at some point Xie Lian and Hua Cheng have seen each other in the past, and that's what inspired the name, but Xie Lian's just forgotten. So that very well could be, right? That very well could be. And Xie Lian, until he had ascended a third time, maybe San Long was waiting for that third ascension before he went and contacted him again. I don't know. But there's clearly a reason that has kept him from Xie Lian. And I don't want to know what, but I know I'm filing in a way that I know it's there. Because otherwise, him not being a patient person, why hasn't he come in contact with him before? Unless he has, and Xie Lian's just forgotten. We don't know. But we get BanYue's backstory, that she's of mixed blood. I like that in the Manhua, when they talk about her making friends with one of the Yanins, with one of the boys, we see the boy playing with her, and he has the same color scheme of robes as Zhao does. It's like, that's really clever. So it's a nice little nod that if you're paying attention, you could be like, wow, he's wearing the same color robes that Zhao is in the Manhua earlier. So if you've read the Dongwall, you can make the connection, or if you've watched the Dongwall, rather. So yeah, the people made fun of her for having Yan in blood, and then she basically at 6 years old, her mother died, and so she kind of drifted away. At 6 years old, she kind of wandered the streets of BanYue, and then she left, and then a fight broke out when she was 10 years old, and she disappeared, and then came back later, like a few years later, a little bit older. So she was a teenager when she died. She was a teenager. She left when she was 10 years old after a battle had broke out, and then came back later and became the Goshi of BanYue. But I like that she came back with black magic and could control the snakes. And we find out later that Zhao can control the snakes as well. And so the thing about BanYue is that she's just a gloomy and unsociable kid. And it makes sense why she's like that. She's like that because of, like, it's kind of like a nature and nurture sort of thing. She didn't really have anybody around to care for her until she met Xie Lian. So yeah, her being gloomy makes a lot of sense. She's an orphan. And her being unsociable, well, yeah, the people of BanYue bullied her, so why would she be social? Because if you were social and somebody was bullying you constantly, you trying to be social, they just keep bullying you, so what's the point? So it makes sense, her personality. And so I like that Kamo said he was afraid that she would seek revenge against those that had bullied her to get power, or the people that had bullied her were afraid she would seek revenge. But she didn't. She didn't seek power to get revenge. So that's interesting. And Xie Lian questions that. He's like, well, did she get back at the bullies? And he's like, no. He's like, I stood up for her, and then we went out in the desert, and she proved herself. And so he's like, I stuck by her and protected her. He's like, no, she didn't seek revenge. It's like, okay. So Kamo kind of sticks up for her. And in the desert, it talks about how she was respectful to the dead. She arranged all the bodies of those that had fallen during the battle and after the sandstorm. And that's what Kamo needed to kind of earn her trust. To like get trust with her and to feel like she was trustworthy. And from there on, he said he fought off anybody that voiced out against her. Which is interesting, right? And San Long mentions too that Kamo was bullied. So it makes sense that Kamo would want to support her because he understands where she's coming from in terms of her being bullied in the past. They kind of have that connection. I feel like that makes her seeming betrayal against him that much more heartbreaking because it seems like he was somebody that sort of put his guard down and let her get close to him and become friends with him despite everything that she had that was kind of against BanYue, and in the end, he feels betrayed by her. And so it just makes that betrayal hurt even more. So there's that. But then he was her loyal supporter, and then she rose to power. I like how the Manhua draws her with like the scepter and like all the gold. I didn't take a screenshot of it because we could only see her back in the Manhua, but she looked really regal. I liked it. I kept thinking we'd see another image of her, but we don't in like the past. I'm sure we'll get some more images of her in the next set of chapters of her in that gear. But yeah, so then Yanin comes to fight, which we'll find out later has Zhao and has Pei Jr. in the army. And then she basically said she had held this grand ceremony to pray to the heavens, and the soldiers had got all fired up about it. And then in the middle of the battle, she opened up the gates. And the thing of it is that I didn't realize, like watching the Danhua, seeing like what the numbers were in ratio, but the novel says there were millions of Yanin soldiers. And there's only 4,000 BanYue soldiers, which granted, the BanYue soldiers are really strong, but 4,000 versus millions? There's no way. So, I mean, with the fortress, you might have stood a chance of defending yourself for a lot longer, but once they were in, no, it was over. It was one against many, and there was just no way that they could fight them. And Komodo's like, I was strong, but not that strong. And so he was mad at BanYue for basically betraying all of them, and so they went and killed her, right? And I want to make note that when we went back, when we had that moment of them on top of the Sinner's Pit, which I love the Sinner's Pit and them going up and how ominous it is, but when they're at the top of the Sinner's Pit and they first see the body dangling from the pole, that we get to see the expressions of Shang and the others, and you can see Pei Jr. and how pale he is and like his expression. And the novel talked about him having a pale expression. So he's in a bad state about all of this, right? And so Komodo's not only mad at her for her betrayal, but he's mad because he keeps stringing her up and she keeps getting down and she keeps throwing soldiers into the Sinner's Pit because she doesn't want them attacking the people that come through BanYue. But we don't know that yet. And so he keeps stringing her up, and then she set up the array. Komodo knows about the array, which is good to make note of. And the soldiers are the only ones. And so they establish this thing where it's interesting. So they have this thing where the soldiers believe that only by devouring the flesh of Yanins, or people from the Central Plains, can they move on to the next life. Can they pass on to the next life without hatred? They need to satiate their hatred of the Yanins by consuming them, and then they can move on and have a peaceful, like, afterlife. And so that kind of explains why they're doing the things that they're doing by tossing people into the pit. And Komodo is just trying to appease the ghosts that are stuck down there. And so we get the concept that the snakes are driving people to BanYue to get the firm after they've been bitten. And that's when Xie Lian starts to get confused. He's like, wait a minute. And I like how the Manhua draws him confused. Like his chibi form, he's just like, wait, no, this isn't adding up. Who are the two women? The one strung up on the pole is the Gyoshi of BanYue. This doesn't add up. What's going on? And so Xie Lian's just getting really, really confused. He's like, why would the Gyoshi of BanYue let herself be caught if she could control the snakes? So that's a really good point. He's like, why would she let herself be caught in the first place if she could control the snakes and the BanYue soldiers are afraid of them? He's like, that doesn't make any sense. So Xie Lian's trying to figure out why her control over the snakes isn't, a way that she can protect herself. So it makes sense later on when she establishes, she's like, I can control some snakes, but all of them? The Xie Lian's like, oh, okay, this is starting to make sense. Like, why is this happening? And I want to make note, while I'm thinking about it, that in this set of chapters, the only drawing that we get, sadly, is a picture of her hanging from the pit. It's a really sad picture. I was like, oh, nope. Was not happy about that. I was like, woof. That's all the images we get. We don't get any nice pictures of San Long as Hua Chong. They don't give us that in the novel. How dare they? I guess we have to rely on the Manhua for that. But anyway, so basically Xie Lian is trying to figure out how this is all working. And that's when BanYue and them come down. And basically she asks how all these soldiers died. And I like that Komodo's like, it was them. And Xie Lian's like, it was an accident. I love the manual how they draw that too, where Xie Lian's like, it was just an accident. He's like, how else do I explain it? And Kamo just like fires off at them. And he says, life is full of accidents. And I feel like Xie Lian and his boomer dad wisdom is like, well, life's just full of accidents. We can't control these things happening. And it's like, oh my God. But Sanlong kind of like takes ownership. He's like, Xie Lian didn't do anything. It was all me. And it's like, okay, well, at least Sanlong is taking ownership. So Sanlong admits he killed them all, right? And Xie Lian's, I do love Xie Lian's whole thing about that line, that life is full of accidents. He would know because he's suffered through most of them for the last 800 years, which is just the worst. I'm like, ugh. And so then, at first, she's going to just let him go. She's like, okay, get out, leave. We've never had heavenly officials here. And it makes sense why she wants them to go, because she's like, she senses that Xie Lian and them are not going to try to take her away to the heavenly realm. So she's like, well, just get your merchants and leave. Don't come back. And she's like, and we'll just keep doing what we're doing. And so it seems like she's just going to let them go. But then Fu Yao shows up. Fu Yao shows up of all people. He left the merchants he was supposed to watch in a little circle, like a little salt circle he made to protect them, and just showed up. And so there are two things about his arrival that are hilarious. One is the fact that Fu Yao's such a diva. He's like wafting away the smell of blood. He's like, ugh. Like he's just that much of a diva. But two, I love that anytime Fu Yao is around, Sanlong's like he tisks at him in the novel. Sanlong does not get along with Fu Yao. He does not like Fu Yao. To be fair, I don't think he likes Nanfang either, but he definitely does not like Fu Yao, which is hilarious because their personalities are not the same, but they're kind of similar, so it's funny that he doesn't like them. But I also think it's very, again, sassy, spicy Xie Lian. Kamo goes crazy and starts beating up BanYue, and Xie Lian makes note that he's like, I would normally be against a child getting beaten by a big, beefy soldier, and you're like, what's the but? Like when he says that. But his thing is like, he's like, Kamo has justification for why he's mad, and BanYue is a ghost. She's not an actual child. She's a dead ghost. So she's like a spiritual being. So he's like, normally I'd be against like child abuse. In this case, he's like, but she's not technically a child, and he technically has a reason. So he's like, it's not in place. He's like, I'm going to back off on this one. So I thought that was interesting. But he can't, I like that BanYue, I put on here BanYue, he asks her about the snakes. He's like, you say you can't control the snakes, but what's up with that? But because it's Zhao and she's trying to protect Zhao, she can't admit anything about it. So she's like, I can't speak. And so then it just makes Kamo even madder. And so he beats her up to the point. He beats her up to the point where Fu Yao is like, should we stop them? And like I said in the reaction, I'm like, when Fu Yao is telling you this is too much, it's too much. And so yeah, eventually Xie Lian goes over to break it up and steps in, and then Xie Lian, God, when the moment that BanYue and them remember each other, and he's like, what have you done? I'm like, because he sounds like a parent, you know? He's like, what happened? What did you do? I kept thinking of Casper. In that moment when Kat, spoilers for the movie Casper. It's from the 90s. If you've not seen it, you should go see it. It's about Casper the Friendly Ghost. You should go see that movie. It's really cute. But there's a moment in it, so spoilers. But there's a moment where Kat's dad dies and becomes a ghost for a brief period. And she's like, what have you done? And I got those vibes from Xie Lian. I was like, oh no, that's the same vibes where he's like, how did you become a ghost? What happened to you? And it's like, ugh. And it makes it even more tragic because Xie Lian kind of left and just abandoned all of them and then forgot about BanYue and never went back and didn't see all this happening. So we'll talk about that in a minute. And BanYue saying, I messed up. She was so excited to see him, but then she's like, I messed up and made a mistake. And Xie Lian's like, he just sounds like a parent that's like, well, tell us about it, And so Xie Lian he talks about how he has bad luck. And for reasons... So we get this part about the East. I'm getting into my part of the notes here. We talk about Xie Lian. He said, for reasons that we don't get. So for reasons, he left the East. Now, are we probably going to find out the answer to this later on in the novel? It's 8 volumes. I'm going to say we are. Because MXTX is not the type of person. MXTX is a very thorough narrator. And so she is not going to just throw a line out there like that. Like, for reasons, I couldn't go back to the East anymore, so I took off to go to another direction. The fact that it's the East he came from, and that's the one area we've not talked about the gods that are in charge of that territory, that feels like it's something that's going to come up later. Feels like it's a plot point that I'm going to file away. We're going to leave the East be for now, and we're going to come back to it later. But for reasons, he left, and he decided he was going to go south. And I like that because, like I said in the reaction, it justifies, it seems like whether he was consciously doing it or not, he was going to where Feng Xin and Mu Qing's temples were. Now, whether or not Xie Lian consciously realized he was doing that, we don't get confirmation on, but that kind of is hinted at, right? But then his compass was broke and he went the opposite direction. Because Xie Lian has bad luck. And so he went the opposite direction, right? And so, anyway, he has bad luck and he ends up getting drafted by the BanYue army. And again, the Manhua at this point was really, really cute. Because they just show him being like, oh, me? Who, me? I look like I'll be a soldier? And I will say, the Manhua, because Star Amber's art is amazing, the Manhua does make Xie Lian look better in the, like, armor of the army there. It does make him look better, right? In the Donghua, he looked, like, kind of clunky and weird. In the Manhua, he looks a lot better. So it's a good thing, right? But I like this idea that BanYue said, she talked about, like, how we basically get the flashback with the soup and everything. Oh my God, I will talk about that in a minute, but in my notes here, when bandits were around, he would protect people, but with others, they'd walk all over him. So there's this concept that when he was fighting bandits, he was feared. But in every other instance, he was walked all over. I find that interesting because it would make sense that Xie Lian would still have this sense of justice about him. His whole thing when he first ascended was that he was fighting for the sake of the common people. So that all makes sense. So that part's neat. But what I like about this is that it's displaying that he still had that sense of justice even 200 years ago, but he was to the point where he kind of was almost like cowed down to the point where he just didn't stand up for himself unless it was to protect other people. Like when it wasn't protecting other people from like a threat, he just let people walk all over him. And it seems like that's something that has just like built up within him over the last several hundred years. And so that's really sad, right? It's really sad. But otherwise, anybody could order him around. So BanYue, that whole thing, I was really hoping the Manhua would deliver on their first meeting because the idea that his food is so terrible, it gets kicked around. And the way that they're like, what is this shit? Like in the Manhua, they're like talking about his food and he's like, I'm really hungry. And the Manhua makes it even worse because it shows like his stomach growling, like Xie Lian's really hungry. And so he's like stirring the porridge to eat it. And then it gets kicked out of the fire. And it shows BanYue just like picking it up and eating it and then choking on it because it's so terrible. And I was really worried the Manhua would not deliver on him, the visual of him like holding her upside down, trying to make her throw up the food. But no, it delivered. It was great. It looks like the meme of Brad Pitt holding the child up by its leg. Like that is it, right? So now I want to picture like San Long holding like BanYue like this, like cradling her and holding her head, and Xie Lian like has her like strung up by the leg. I need somebody to Photoshop that immediately. I thought that was really good. But yeah, starving to the point where she would eat food that she'd either vomited or that was still in the sand. Like she was that hungry. She was starving. And that visual, that description of her bones, like her stomach sticking to her backbones. Oh, I was like, that's so grisly. Like that description. And so Xie Lian, he says that he can't remember how he died. And Fu Yao questions, he's like, well, why don't you remember these things? And Xie Lian's kind of like, well, he's like, he gives him the memory speech, and he's like, yeah. He's like, well, you know, why would I want to remember that? He's like, why would I want to remember being killed and trampled on when I could remember something nice like eating good food? He's like, I've kind of blocked out all these bad memories. So Xie Lian, he has blocked out the bad memories because of literally PTSD. Like, he's got so much trauma. He's like, I can't remember all these bad things happen to him constantly. So, and he has all this bad luck. So he would constantly be getting in accidents and constantly getting hurt. So yeah, of course he'd try to forget that. Why would you want to remember that all the time? Right? So he says that he's like, oh, it was in the midst of battle and I don't remember exactly why. And so then we have this thing here, and I've made a note of it because this one paragraph, I think it was chapter 28, I was like, excuse me? But that explains so much about his personality. So he doesn't remember. He just knows that he was trampled and then he passed out, and that when he woke up, he woke in the river. And we realized that his body like a corpse had been dumped in the river to float downstream. They'd taken his armor off, so he didn't have the armor on anymore. You wouldn't know he was a soldier. And so he floated to Yan'an. And then it said that he recovered for years. He recovered for years. Years he recovered. And then he got a compass that worked and went back to going south and forgot about BanYue. And he just forgot about the kingdom of BanYue and about BanYue herself. And he went with the flow and just went on his merry way. And the sad thing about that, the thing that like floors me with that, is that it was another failure. He tried to save her and he tried to like stop the fighting and it failed. He ended up getting trampled to death. And so he's just like, well, I failed again. I'll just move on to the next place and maybe things will turn out better there. Oh, it's just like, at that moment, I'm like, that's what he's been doing for the last 800 years. He's just been going on these journeys, just scrap collecting and doing whatever, trying to make a difference. And when it fails, he just goes, well, I tried, guess I'll just move on. And he just moves on and forgets about it. And that's the crazy thing, is like he was recovering in Yan'an for years. And so I'm like, did he run into Pei? I guess Pei Jr. ascended immediately after that battle. Because I'm like, did he not run into Pei Jr. like when he came back to Yan'an? I guess not. But I'm like, he recovered for years. He never went back to BanYue. He never went back to see what happened. To see what happened with little BanYue. He just healed up over the course of years and then got a compass and left and went on the way he was supposed to go from the start. But it's like, what has he left in his wake? Like, BanYue, like, she thinks that she failed him, and he's like, well, you know, it's kind of not all your fault. But it's like, who else has he interacted with and left, like, in his wake of misfortune? That's the crazy thing. And I feel like that's going to come up in this series as we go through. But I'm like, why did he leave the East? What happened in the East that he had to leave for reasons? He says he doesn't even remember why he died or was trampled. And then BanYue speaks up and she's like, BanYue's like, it was because you saved me that you got trampled. She's like, you saved me and you died. And she's like, that's why I made that stone, you know, epitaph for you. And so they all kind of look at him like, you know, you saved her. Why didn't you say it earlier? And he's like, well, I kind of forgot. And he's like, I forgot about it. He's like, you know, when you're trampled by thousands of soldiers, he's like, you know, yeah, you just kind of die. And at that point, again, Fu Yao kind of like drops the smug, like pretentiousness and kind of feels pity for him. I'm like, when Fu Yao, our diva boy, like feels pity for you, that's a big deal. And that's when he gives the memory speech. I wrote down my notes. That's when he gives a speech about memory. And Fu Yao's just like, and San Long, it's San Long that asked, you know, it said you died. And that's what brought that whole thing up. And so Xie Lian's just kind of like, well, what can we do? What can we do? So at this point, he asks BanYue, he's like, okay, you can summon snakes, but you say they don't listen to you. Well, let's summon one and see what happens. And so that's when she does, and the snake does not listen to her. I like how the novel frames her like Xie Lian can see the moment where she realizes, oh shit, the snake is not going to listen to me. And he goes, okay, and he reacts to it. Fu Yao is just done at this point. Fu Yao's like, nope, let's just... I think it's interesting that Xie Lian tries to like say, we don't know the whole story yet. It's very Lan Wangji. He's like, we don't know the whole story yet, so we can't really convict anybody. But Fu Yao just wants to be done with his job. He wants to go home and eat bonbons. He's like, I'm done. So he just immediately wants to arrest Kamo and BanYue and call it a day. We don't have to have absolute proof. We got enough evidence to book them. Let's go. And Xie Lian's like, well, now wait a minute. So again, Zhao's not been revealed yet. He still hasn't been present. I do like that BanYue makes the note that there was only one person alive down in the sinner's pit, meaning Huachong is dead. And so Fu Yao's like, we have all we need to connect BanYue, and Xie Lian, I feel like because of his connection with her, he does give her a little bit more benefit of the doubt. And he's like, no, we don't know the full story yet. We still need to know a little bit more information. But Fu Yao's not convinced. And that's when the snakes start showing up. And I didn't realize one of the snakes bit Fu Yao, but apparently it does. And then San Long this whole time, like when the snakes start coming around and they like form a circle around Xie Lian and San Long, and Xie Lian's like, why are the snakes acting so weird? And it's because they're terrified of San Long. That's really good. I like that a lot. His presence wards off the snakes. And Fu Yao calls him out. Fu Yao's like, hey, this guy you've been standing next to, just want to point out, he's probably not human. Do you know that, Xie Lian? You must know that San Long is not human at this point. And I'm waiting till the next chapter for Xie Lian to be like, don't care. Right? But Xie Lian's following his heart and his brain to determine that it's okay if San Long is a ghost king. He will love him regardless. But yeah, just the more we get with Xie Lian and his memory and the fact that he's blocked so much out and the fact that he seems to be going through this cycle of go, try to help, fail, rinse, repeat it's very interesting. And him just being this scrap collector going about the world and just going along the way. It feels very Doctor Who. I've talked about this in previous reactions, but it feels very much like Doctor Who, like just going in, having these experiences, and then leaving the people to deal with everything. Except in this case, Xie Lian just kind of left this dumpster fire in BanYue and was like, what happened? And then just went on his way. So yeah, I've talked for nearly an hour about this, but these I felt like when I got done reading these chapters, I knew I wanted to bring Whiteboard Kun out because I kind of wanted to talk about San Long versus Xie Lian and their similarities and differences. But I was thinking to myself, I'm like, am I going to be able to talk for a long time about these chapters? But no, there was a lot to talk about. Quite a lot. And this thing is, I feel like with the next set of chapters, there's going to be even more to talk about because we haven't even gotten to the Zhao reveal yet. We haven't gotten to the Windmaster and her black cladded, what was it, Kuska said in the Discord, like the big tittied goth woman. We haven't gotten to her yet, and the Windmaster. We haven't gotten to the stuff with the OVA. There is quite a lot left to finish. If I go to part 10 in this book, and I stop at part 10, we've got that much left. Seems like a lot for next week. Now, granted, some of that is glossary material. Let me go back to the glossary when it's done. So, yeah, we've got basically, where's the glossary end? Okay, we've basically got that little chunk there, which is still quite a bit. But that's gonna be next week. We're gonna finish up volume 1. As much as I love this cover, we're gonna finish it up next week. And I think that when I get done with next week's going to be a long video. I can just already tell it's going to be long. It's going to be good, but it's going to be long. But we're going to finish that. I may have to record ahead because I'm actually going to be possibly out of town during the day, Saturday and Sunday of next week. So I may record ahead. We'll see. But I may record ahead, but in any case, we're going to finish up volume 1, and at the end of it, I'm going to watch the trailer for season 2 of the Donghua, because I'll feel like I'm ready at that point. I feel like I'm ready. It'll be a nice prelude into the second volume. It'll be a nice little prelude. So we'll finish up volume 1, which will be chapters 29, 30, and 31. So 3 chapters. We'll finish up that, and then we will also watch the season 2 trailer for the Donghua. Maybe it will usher in good vibes to have the Donghua manifest itself this fall. So we'll see. But in any case, I'm curious to know your thoughts about these chapters. Please, no spoilers, hints, or clues. We'll cross these bridges as we go, but I'm curious to know if you guys figured out about Zhao at this point of the novel, or what you thought about BanYue. BanYue and Xie Lian, they're so precious in this, and the Manhua, even when she's getting beaten to a pulp, she looks cute. And then Xie Lian, like, dropping himself down to her level to talk to her. It's great. It's all good, so. But in any case, I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back next week to finish up volume 1, where the Donghua ended, of Heaven Official's Blessing. Bye.